Thanks for tuning in. You're listening to the Embrace Mental Health podcast,
where we embrace a not-so-clinical approach
to conversations surrounding all things mental health. Happy Mental Health Monday, everybody, and welcome to the Embrace Mental Health podcast. I'm your host, Kelsey, and I've got here with me today, Wesley.
Good to be here. Hi, everyone.
And today's episode is our first installment of a Mythbusters series. We will not be doing any hard science or any exploding things or stuff that they usually did on that show, but yeah, there's obviously mental health has a lot of myths around it or misconceptions or just kind of false beliefs that people have around it. And so our hope is to help clear up some of those misunderstandings and give people just a better place to understand and think about mental health just for everyone's sake. So yeah. Mm-hmm. But of course, first we have our introductory question. And so this introductory question is, what are some of your favorite podcasts besides our own, of course?
Of course. Yeah, this one, it's a given.
Yep. Wes, you go first.
Sure. Well, I have not been listening to podcasts as much in recent months as I used to. The car is my primary place for listening to podcasts by far, and my commute has become shorter, which is a wonderful thing in some ways. And also, I've been dealing with working with clients who have some pretty complicated issues. And so sometimes, usually on my way to places, I like it to be quiet anyway. And it used to be that on the way back home, I would listen to music or podcasts, especially. But a lot of times on the way home, I just need that time of silence to decompress. So, yeah, but most of the podcasts that I listen to, and in fact, most of the media that I intake in general is pretty lighthearted because I deal with enough heavy stuff, and it just kind of works for me. So I like a podcast by the comedian Pete Holmes called You Made It Weird. And he's been doing that podcast for many years, and he gets some great interviews. He asks people some really kind of off the wall and interesting questions. And whenever I see a name on there that I recognize, then I like to listen to that interview. And I usually learn some stuff from celebrities or people who I admire that I wouldn't have learned anywhere else. And again, it's just kind of fun the whole way through. Another one would be, there's one by the actors who played Merry and Pippin in The Lord of the Rings, Dominic Monaghan, that's his name, and it's a mouthful. I believe that's how you pronounce it. Who plays Merry, and Billy Boyd, who plays Pippin, and of course they have many other roles as well in different films and shows. But they're just two delightful people who have such wonderful chemistry, and again, just very off the wall. Their kind of humor fits mine, and there's lots of Lord of the Rings information in there. So there's a gaming podcast that I enjoy called Top 100 Games, and again, that one's very lighthearted. And then I also have been listening to the Jon Stewart. It's called The Problem with Jon Stewart from Apple Podcasts. It's from Apple TV. I think that one was discontinued recently, but on all of these shows, I'm still catching up on some very old episodes. And so I have podcasts to last me probably the rest of my life, even just with those shows. And so there's other ones I listen to, but those are my most regular. Long answer, but yeah.
I like Wes. I don't listen to I just don't have time to listen to a ton of podcasts, which is ironic that, I'm trying to get people to listen to our podcast. And I'm like, but I don't have time to listen to podcasts, but
we're not copying anyone. At least you could be sure of that. This is our own voice.
Yep. But one that I do listen to fairly consistently is one that's called The Holy Post. And it's for those who grew up in the Christian realm. The creator of VeggieTales, actually, Phil Vischer, he is the main host of it, as well as a guy named Sky Jitani. And I don't really know what his claim to fame is up until the Holy Post podcast. Maybe he was famous before then, I don't know. But anyway, they do a good job. I mean, it's not necessarily lighthearted because they do cover a lot of like deep and sometimes controversial type topics. but they do it with a lot of nuance, and they don't take themselves too seriously, but they always start their episodes with like a lighthearted segment. And like one of them, they have like animal news where they talk about, like, for instance, one of them was, I think it was like a dolphin or a whale or something that kept hopping, or no, a walrus, some sort of animal that kept jumping onto people's boats. And so they were talking about that. They also have a segment that is called News of the Butt. They talk about something either poop related or, you know, the females that they have as their co-hosts are always like, "Oh no, it's News of the Butt Week." Like, no, but it's always
News of the
quite,
butt week.
yeah,
I see why you like it.
yep, it's comical. So, but yeah, they just appreciate their perspectives and the nuance that they kind of approach a lot of different topics with. And then one that I haven't listened to in a while. One of the hosts of it had a baby, so they kind of went on hiatus for a little bit, and then I haven't picked it back up since they've come back. But it's called the Alive and Free podcast, and they just have a lot of interesting advice and discussions around a lot of topics that I have found relevant to my life a lot of the time. And who doesn't want to feel alive and free? And so I just feel like they do a good job of getting kind of in depth into issues and not just staying light and fluffy on stuff, which I always appreciate. So I should probably get back on that bandwagon. But I like Wes. Like, I don't have a very long commute anymore. About 10-minute drive to work and then a 10-minute drive home. So and also like Wes, a lot of times those are like the 20 minutes a day I can have quiet. So it's like, man,
It's the in between. Yeah,
yeah,
we need that in between.
yeah. Truthfully, if there was one thing, I wish I could clone myself or have my stunt double or whatever it would be.
Your podcast double.
Yeah, who could just be like alive strictly for like media consumption of some type. Like, there's so many podcasts I wish I had more time to listen to, and music. There's so much good music, and I am fairly confident I have some undiagnosed ADHD, and so whenever I'm doing any task at work that has any words involved with it whatsoever, I can't do music with words, and I certainly can't do podcasts. And most of the stuff that I do, I kind of have to be focused because there's words involved, and so I can't filter one out. And so I don't often get to listen to that stuff while I'm at work, which I wish. So I need that stunt double who can listen to everything that I want to listen to and watch all the TV and the movies and just consume all the different kinds of media that I wish I had a little bit more time to take in. But yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are so many good, especially TV shows. That's the thing that I miss out on the most. Like, people ask, have you caught this great TV show? And the answer is always no. There are so few TV shows that I have watched, especially to completion, even though I love the medium and I enjoy it and I respect it, but there's just too much of a time commitment. And then even movies, I do like movies, and I like the fact that I get the whole story in a couple of hours or so. Recently it seems like there's more 3-hour movies, but a lot of them are still close to 2. But since having kids, especially, it's very unlikely that I've seen the movie that you're asking me about. And again, when it comes to TV shows, I never will, but movies I try to catch, books I try to catch, podcasts, not so much. But yeah, glad to be on a podcast.
Yep, there you go. So yes, thank you to all of our listeners. Who make time to listen to us, because it means a lot to us. There's a lot of people who have limited time in their lives, and so anybody that gets to spend any time with us, we're appreciative. So yeah,
totally.
All right, shall we get into our myth busting mode here, Wesley?
Yeah, let's bust some myths. All
right, let's do it.
Well, the two that I came up with are things that we've talked about a little bit on some previous episodes, but I think it's worth giving them special attention, especially as myths, to really highlight, like, these are some things that I have personally heard quite a few times in different places, social media, in person, on videos, whatever. And it's simply not the case. So, commonly held beliefs. This first one that I have is that essentially the message is that mental health is only an issue for people with a mental illness, people who have been diagnosed with a mental illness, or people who would admit that they struggle with mental health in some way, or perhaps it's apparent that they struggle with mental health in some way. And thankfully, the stigma around things like therapy and any talk around mental health is dissipating as the years go by. But I would still say that it's pretty strong. And there are a lot of people out there who see anything related to mental health as being for people who they might not use the word crazy, but they see them as just kind of the crazy ones who are, most people wouldn't say, oh, I have it all together, but they consider people who take advantage of mental health resources as really not having it all together. So anyway, the reality of this is that mental health is really a human issue. If you think about mental health, that's the health of the mind. And I think that we all interact with our minds on a daily basis. Mental health is something that everyone should be aware of. And even if you're somebody who functions pretty well mentally, and you would say that you have little to no struggle with mental health is still something that you can work to maintain, to improve on, to prepare for the curveballs that life will throw at you of stress. And it's not just about our emotions either, just really going along with this. Sometimes people think of mental health as being all about feelings, and feelings are a very important part of it. Just like, again, they're an important part of being human. But when we discuss mental health, we're talking about relationships. How do we relate to one another? And not just romantic or intimate relationships, but friends or at work, people with different power dynamics. This is all related to mental health. When we talk about mental health, we're talking about productivity and how to be able to do your work well, or do work that you're proud of and not be held back by mental barriers. Or barriers of your behavior that are affected by your mental health. When we talk about mental health, we're talking about physical health. Our minds and our bodies are really inseparable. You can't affect one without affecting the other. And so if we want to have optimal physical health, we need to be talking and thinking about our mental health. And another major area that I was thinking of that everybody can relate to is focus. I think that focus is something that we all interact with and all struggle with at some point or another. So those are just some of the areas that I think about when it comes to mental health. Just like, physical health is something that is important to think about, even if you aren't struggling with a physical illness or a physical disability or anything like that. Physical health is something that we all need to work to maintain, and mental health is no different in that respect.
I think, an example of that would be like this, the equivalency of this on the physical health side would be kind of like, well, I should really only learn about healthy eating if I have heart disease or, something like that. Whereas
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, you probably should be learning about healthy eating if you have heart disease. But like really healthy eating is a beneficial thing for everybody, whether you are in a good state of physical health or if you have some physical health struggles. It's the same with mental health. Like everybody can stand to benefit from improving their mental health, whether that's their mental processes or emotional skills or thinking patterns or all the other kind of categories that Wesley talked about too, that are all a part of those things, always improving your mind and how you speak to yourself, how you speak to others. All of those different pieces are great things to always be working on improving your skills on. And so, yeah, I thought this was a great point.
Thank you. Yeah. And with your example of eating and heart disease, I try to eat well to prevent my body from being affected by illness, to be less likely to basically to have a good quality of life for as many years as I can with as few interruptions as I can. That's why I try to be healthy. And, just like my mental health, I'm sure that there are many areas where I could improve. I try to do the best with with the situation that I'm in. But yeah, that's something to think about too. You can think of it as preventative care because again, life will throw you curveballs. I mean, you will go through grief. You will go through things not working out the way that you want them to. Some areas of your life could fall apart. That's just kind of a side effect of living life and being human.
Yeah.
And or I mean, even just aging, going through different stages of life, different major events that we go through. This all is going to have an impact on our mental health. And so it's good to always be aware of it and to think, how can I prepare for, uh, expect the unexpected, or prepare for events like these and be in a good place to deal with it.
Hmm. And my final point on this myth, obviously we've talked about this before, and I'm just going to keep saying it. Everybody here, we guarantee that you have a close person to you who struggles with their mental health. And so the more that you can be informed and know about mental health, like the more that you can be a safe person for them and a good support for them. And so there is all sorts of reasons for everybody to be concerned about or working towards improving their understanding or skills of mental health. So, yeah.
Kelsey, yeah, that reminds me of the podcast episode that you put out about your own personal story, and about how, I mean, you could have gone many, many more years struggling with some of the things that you were struggling with, unless you had people in your life who knew enough about mental health to make certain suggestions, or to
Mhm.
reflect back to you, hey, this seems like a problem, or this isn't, this doesn't seem healthy. Uh, if you had people around you who were like very uncomfortable, or we might say like illiterate when it comes to mental health, then uh, that could have been the story of decades of your life. And it is for a lot of people out there, just
Yeah.
because they don't have folks in their life who are informed enough, like our podcast listeners will be, to be able to point them in the right direction, at least, or to, point out the struggles that they're having, to acknowledge them.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, bam, busted that
Yeah,
myth. Well done.
busted. What you got, Kelsey? What's yours? First
All
one
right.
here.
My first myth that I want to tackle is that people who struggle with mental illness are weak minded. I think this is a fairly common understanding or idea that people have that, well, if somebody has a mental illness struggle, then that must mean they are mentally weak. And I mean, first of all, it's just not true. Not that that's enough to bust this myth, but
That's right. Mystery solved, I'm convinced.
yep, yep.
Next.
But I think mental illness can be such a hard thing to understand because it is just so, it's one of those invisible illnesses, right? Like if somebody has a broken leg, you're going to see the cast, you're going to see the crutches, or if you watch the NFL too much, you're going to see the actual break, and it's horrifying. But those things that you can actually see is easier for you to understand, of like, oh, okay, there's an injury here, or this is the issue that you're dealing with. Where mental health is so difficult because nobody can actually see what it looks like, and because we can't feel each other's feelings, and so unless you are in that situation, it can be difficult to understand. um I think a lot of times, people will say to people who are struggling with their mental health, like things like, well, buck up, or just suck it up, or stop worrying, or just calm down, all those things that it's just kind of like, it's like this belief that a mental health struggle is just a choice. It's a matter of choice. And if you would just choose to feel better, like in it. And so because it's simple for me to just snap out of this particular feeling or situation or whatever, because it's not simple for you, that must mean that you have some sort of weakness. You're lazy or weak-willed, or you're just being dramatic, or you're stubborn. Some of these things
Seeking
all comes down
attention,
to, yeah, seeking
the one that I've
attention.
heard. Yeah.
Yep, yep. And it's just not that simple. If anything, the opposite is true. Fighting a mental health condition takes a lot of strength. It takes a lot of strength to work your way through it. We've talked about, all the hard work that goes into it. It is hard work. And so the people who are going through that and are doing the hard work, they are not weak-minded. And, another thing, I thought of this all the time, especially when I was in my worst places of anxiety, where I just wanted to be like, I promise you, I am not weak-minded. Like, if anything, my mind is so strong, and I wish I could find a chink in the armor to like calm it down a little bit. Like, it is so strong-willed, and I just couldn't figure out how to get it tamed. But, I think Wesley has kind of discussed this concept a little bit. But, a lot of times, a lot like, rather than just trying to get rid of my anxiety or get rid of my depression, it's okay, how can I reframe it? How can I refocus it? How can I tame it down a little bit so that it's working for me? And I truly do believe that the same strong mind that I had that was, had me stuck in anxiety for a little bit is the same strong mind that I have now that's helping me be able to work full time and coach a basketball team and put on a podcast and try and maintain, good relationships and, those strong mind. It wasn't a weakness of mind that was my struggle for anxiety. It was me figuring out how to tame it, refocus it, and put it in a way that it was productive for me, working for me and not working against me.
Yeah, I so often encounter people in my personal and professional life who seem to misconstrue different causes and effects. And I hear you talking about that at the moment too, Kelsey. Like sometimes um, the thing that is causing us our biggest problems, our biggest struggles, is also the thing that is kind of our superpower. It's one of our
Yeah.
greatest strengths. And it's just that something's out of whack or it's not being applied in a way, in an ideal way. But yeah, usually, if part of your car isn't working, you don't necessarily want to just like eliminate that part. You got to get it working in a way that, working the way that it's designed to work, or working with another part the way that they're designed to work together. And so that's really well said. Another thing that you mentioned that I'm very passionate about, that I was actually thinking about sharing on this podcast anyway, is another myth, but I think you really spoke well to it, is this idea that just really some of the judgmentalism, I guess, that I've heard from people who feel that they do not struggle with mental health towards others who do. I've just encountered multiple times people judging others as if they think and handle things in all the same ways that they themselves do, that the person who's judging them would do. Um, it's like I don't understand why people struggle with this or that. That's not a struggle for me, or that's not how I would react to that. And it's like, well, no, obviously, of course not. We're all unique. We all have our own unique past and present and upbringing and culture and factors of oppression, or there are just so many factors that make us all unique. And so something might happen to one person and they have no problem with it, and a similar thing might happen to another person and it really just kind of wrecks their life. And there might be something that would bother the second, or that would not bother the second person, that does bother the first. But anyway, my point is basically, if you feel the need to judge somebody else for having a problem in the area of mental health, I encourage you to just take into consideration that it's probably a lot more complicated than you realize it is. And try to, if it's somebody who you can ask them respectfully about what they're going through. Of course, offering support is a good thing, but even just being a listening ear and trying to understand. It's like, I care about you. I want to support you, but I'm having a hard time understanding this. Is this something you can put into words for me? Because I want to understand it.
For one other burst of evidence to try and finish the bust of this one, I just actually looked up a list of people who are well accomplished, or a lot of people look up to, or have done significant things in their lives. And just these are people who have mental health struggles. Now, some of the newer ones, like these are actual, diagnosed. And for some of the more historical ones, a lot of people just, I don't want to say it's an assumption, but like an informed assumption that because of things they read in their biographies or that they heard from their writings or different stuff, that they're like, yeah, this person probably would have been diagnosable in this particular area of mental illness. But to just kind of go through a list of a lot of significant people that have struggled with mental illness that you hopefully understand, oh, if this person did all this, but they still had this mental health struggle, it's probably not just you can't just say people are weak-minded.
It's not a
because
weakness issue.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah. So first we have Michael Phelps, who obviously is like the most decorated Olympian of all time, an incredible athlete. Beethoven, who composed so much remarkable music. and music that's still very recognizable today. Sir Isaac Newton, Winston Churchill, Buzz Aldrin, Ernest Hemingway, Frank Lloyd Wright, Leo Tolstoy, Abraham Lincoln, John Madden, who is like, that's like the epitome of toughness right there, like a big time well-known football coach. Like
Mhm.
that's not going to be a weakness. He had a pretty severe phobia of flying. Vincent van Gogh, Charles Dickens, Oprah Winfrey, who's a multi-billionaire. There's a lot of people, and I mean, this is just a few people that I picked off of a list. Like, there's a lot more, and there's probably a lot of other people who have accomplished a lot who, we just don't know about their mental health struggles, or yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is that I'm sure that many people, if not all of these I would think that you couldn't get to that level of accomplishment or expertise without coming across some kinds of mental health hurdles. And just
Yeah.
because those particular areas of their life are not recorded in the history books, or they didn't make them public, doesn't mean that they weren't challenges. So yeah, it's really, really irrelevant to how much somebody could accomplish or how strong-minded, so to speak, they are. And I think it's so important to uh, bring up a list like that, Kelsey. That's awesome, because it's also, I've heard first from some people, this isn't a common attitude, but I have heard it before, that it's like uh, that my mental condition is making it impossible for me to reach my full potential. And while there is some truth to that, obviously continuing to work on our mental health and work through our struggles can really equip us to be at our very best and be our best selves. It doesn't mean, clearly from the list that you just shared, it doesn't mean that somebody can't be outstanding, excellent, and successful. And so if anybody out there is just sort of assuming that um, that this thing is going to be a barrier that gets in the way of every area of their life, perhaps, or maybe not something quite that dramatic, but well, the evidence shows otherwise, that it is possible. And even if you're sort of living with mental illness, you might say maybe it's something that will never completely go away. You just learn to manage it in an effective way, and you might be a name on a list like this at some point in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Bam.
Okay. Yeah.
Busted.
Busted. We need like a big stamp, just
Yeah.
like in Mythbusters, that goes across the screen
Yeah.
for our YouTube friends. All right. Well, the other one that I have here, myth number 3 for today, is this one. I've tried therapy and it didn't go well. Therapy must not work for me. So this is one, of course, that I have heard before. Therapy is not my thing. Therapy doesn't work for me. And I've got to be perfectly honest, as I have in other episodes, that therapy may not be like the number one, fix all kind of thing for everyone out there. Perhaps you're more of a support groups person, or a psychoeducation person, or some other form of mental health help, I suppose. But um, the fact is that not all in fact, generally every therapist has a unique approach. I think that the best therapists out there are ones who practice in ways that only they can. They bring something of themselves to their work, and that might not be a click for you in every single case. It might be that maybe the therapist just, it doesn't have the greatest strength in the area where you need the greatest strength, or maybe it's just a personality thing. But for better or worse, I would say probably for worse, because it can be frustrating sometimes to find a therapist who's a good fit. But it really is normal to have to sort of shop around for 2 or 3, or sometimes even 4 or 5 or 6 therapists before you find somebody who's a good fit. And as we discussed in a recent episode about how to find a therapist, um, the results are worth it when you find that relationship with the person who can help you through your journey in your area of mental health. It can be one of the most important relationships in your life, really. And so it's worth the effort, even if it takes months and months to find someone. Obviously, I hope in your case it is the first time and you get lucky, or even the second time. But I do encourage folks to not give up after one time. Um, so, yeah, any thoughts on that, Kelsey?
Yeah, sure. I think, we've discussed this in a couple of other episodes, but it's worth bringing up again, of there are so many different types of therapy and there are so many different types of therapists. So that is certainly not a one size fits all. And so, if you saw a therapist and it didn't go well, it's a very high chance that maybe just the way that they practice therapy wasn't something that is going to click with what you needed at that time. Or, like you said, like personality differences. I think it could even be similar to, having different teaching styles. Like some people will prefer one professor to teach biology, and some people will prefer a different teacher or professor to teach biology because the teaching styles are going to be different and different people respond better or worse. And so, I think, Wesley had talked about before how like doctors typically are going to treat, if you go to Dr. A with strep throat and you go to Dr. B with strep throat, both of them are probably going to give you an antibiotic. Now, their bedside matter might be different, how they treat you might be different, but regardless, like the treatment is going to look very similar no matter which doctor you go to. But for therapy, like each therapist kind of has their own niche, their own understanding that blends with what their personality is. And so if you met with somebody who you just didn't click with, that has more to do with probably that particular therapist than it has to do with all therapy in general. It's sort of like if you go to Baskin Robbins and you get a flavor of ice cream. Like for me, I'm not a coconut person. I just don't. So like if I got an ice cream cone of coconut ice cream and I was like, I don't like this. I don't like any ice cream. There'd be so many people like, there's so many other types of ice cream. You have to try the other types of ice cream before you can say, I don't like ice cream. Like, there's a lot of different flavors of therapists out there. And so,
that's a good analogy. I came across a post online recently that was like, I really respect my uncle because he's played the same video game for like 23 years or something like that. And whenever you suggest a new video game to him, he's like, no, thanks. I already play a video game. Or,
right.
and I was thinking about that, like, oh no, I've seen a TV show. Thank you. I'm good.
Right. Like there's so much variety out there that just trying one and concluding that every variety would not work for you is just, there's just so many different types out there. And like you said, it can be one of the most life-changing relationships for you. So it's definitely worth keep looking for that right fit.
Yeah, keep the long game in mind. I think that's so important. It's like, if let's say that it takes you 8 months to find a therapist who's a good fit. Okay, so that could be frustrating. And then maybe you take a week or two off from your search sometimes. That's okay. But if you continue the search, let's say it takes 8 months, if you find somebody who's a good fit for whatever you're working through, it could only be 3 months later that you notice a significant difference in the area where you've been struggling for years, where you could potentially struggle for the rest of your life. Or even if it's 6 months, even if it's a whole year, it's uncommon these days to go to a therapist for a whole year, although it certainly happens. But even if it takes you a year, if this is no longer a challenge for you for the remainder of your life, that is all time that is very well spent.
And I think it just expedites the process too, because when I think about it, the first therapy experience that I had was when I was about like a fourth grader. The first therapist I saw was a play therapist, and I played with puppets for half an hour, and it was kind of weird. It was a weird experience for me. She concluded that I was okay, and then we had shortly thereafter a family therapy session, and basically all that I could remember from that was just my family yelling at each other, and I was like, therapy's awful. Like, what?
Yeah, this is a bad experience.
Yeah, why would I ever want to do this again? But when I think about like the times in my life where I have gone to therapy, I can't even imagine how less far along I would be at this point if I had never seen a therapist again because of that experience. Now, in some ways, it was good that I had it as a child because it gave me more time. The second therapist that I saw was when I was in the 8th grade, and that went much better. And I was like, oh, okay, I can understand. Like this was actually very helpful for me, and I was not open-minded going into it. I mean, understandably, with my first experience with it, and like, would I have ever achieved the level where I'm at right now if I had never seen a therapist? Maybe, but I promise you, like, I would not be at this point now if it wasn't for therapy. And at different points in my life, I had different needs. And so that's another thing to consider too. Like, your needs will change for what you're looking for in a therapy at the different points in your life. And so there's all sorts of factors that go into it, that it's just, um, it could set you back if you decide that because of one therapist relationship that didn't go well, or even two or three, that it's just not for you.
Mhm.
It's just been such a beneficial experience for me that it's hard for me to hear that. So
I would love to talk at some point on this podcast about like what to look for in. Well, actually, I know that we have an episode coming up here about how to prepare for your first therapy session, and I hope at that point to talk about like what to
2 weeks
look
from now,
for.
actually, but
Okay, there we go. Stay tuned. But
yeah.
one thing that I plan or hope to talk about in that then is basically as a new client, what are some things that you can look for to have some level of certainty or hope that this is going to be a good fit, to not have to, I've talked with clients who have stayed in therapy with a therapist for over a year when they knew early on that it wasn't very effective, just because they had a hard time saying no and walking away, and they assumed that they were the problem and things like that, when it wasn't a good fit. And so there are certain things that you as a client can look for to be able to say, okay, is this going to get me the outcome that I want or not? And within hopefully a few sessions or so, you'll be able to know. So I look forward to sharing more about that.
Yeah. Nice to give a little teaser there.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Any final thoughts, or are we considering this one busted?
It's over.
It's over.
Never to see
All
the
right.
light of day again. If I hear it again, I'll know that that's some poor sap who's never listened to this podcast episode.
Poor
But
sap.
unlikely to happen.
Yeah. All right. So for our last myth to bust today, this one I think is maybe not one that's as explicitly stated. I think this one might be a little bit more on the subconscious-ish level. That's hard to say. So anyway, I'm not going to do it again.
Subconscious-ish.
Yeah. But I think there are a lot of people out there who have this kind of belief that if I decide to go to therapy, I will lose all control. And I think there's a number of reasons for this. I think a lot of people avoid therapy as a self-protection mode. I think a lot of people have figured out, okay, I'm going to kind of hodgepodge, put these things together, and this is me coping. And if you pull one of these Lincoln logs out, or not Lincoln log, Jenga blocks, like I've got this tower of Jenga blocks that's hanging on by a thread. And if I go to therapy and they pull that one out, it's all going to fall apart. I'm going to lose all control. And it's just better for me to have my dysfunctional tower of blocks here than to risk losing it all by going to therapy. And I think there's a lot of different reasons for this. I think a lot of it comes from not having a total understanding of what the point of therapy is or what therapy looks like. First of all, I think some people have just been taught that talking about your feelings is unacceptable. And so if you grew up in a household or had, those kinds of messages put into you, then, if you've just been taught that that's not okay. And so that's, you still have that belief that's kind of in there of like, that's not okay. And so there's a self-protection mode. I think too, people become complacent with the coping, but the coping and flourishing are just not the same thing. And there's people that are like, okay, I'm holding it together, and if I even risk potentially, I'm going to lose it. But you're like, okay, we've got a therapist here. Is that your goal as a therapist, Wesley, to help people just kind of fall apart and try and reconstruct them? Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I like to just just make them feel like they've lost all control, so that I can put them together to be this person who I want them to be. No, of course not. Yeah, we're looking to help them, like you've talked about before in this podcast, like to be more themselves and feel more alive than ever. And I love what you were, and I'll let you continue here, of course, but I just love what you said about that feeling like I'm just holding it together and I'm maintaining. And there's so many people out there feel like that is what life is about, that's really the best that they can expect. And
Mhm.
while that may be true in some situations, you might need to just sort of keep your head down and keep going until you make it through that particular circumstance. That is not really the best quality of life that you can ask for.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I mean, therapy can be hard. And it can require some sacrifice, certainly some work. You might feel in moments like you're falling apart. I mean, got to be honest, it is difficult. But part of that sort of letting go and falling apart is also um, letting go of that thing that is such a struggle for you, or those things. Um, so anyway, all that to say that that is certainly not the ultimate goal. I guess I have to be honest and say that it is sometimes like a side effect, I guess you might say. But if you're working with somebody who is a mental health professional who knows what they're doing, they're going to guide you through that so that it doesn't really feel like you've really lost all control and like you're just, basically hopeless and lost for the rest of your life. It's going to be in a context that is supportive, where you can continue to have hope, continue to have like a sense of self. So yeah, long answer, but yeah, of course not. Of course,
Yeah.
that's not the goal. Yeah.
I think, to keep using the Jenga metaphor here, I
Uh,
think sometimes therapy can look like, okay, we're going to add some blocks here to make this a little bit more stable. And some,
yes.
like, not that every coping skill that you have is a bad one, but sometimes like there are some coping skills that you can add to your tower to make it more stable. And in some cases, like the tower is bad enough that maybe it needs to be deconstructed and built up so that it's better. It's not
Yeah.
just the goal of, okay, destruction, you have a pile of blocks, best of luck to you. It's
Mhm.
like, how can we get you your best tower? Um, I think, some of this comes from that idea of the medical model being the therapist client model. And there is a certain level of which that is accurate. We've certainly talked about how it is not black and white the exact same. Um, but especially I think when people think of this, okay, illness and cure. And so, and I think a lot of people think of the cure as being just like surgical, and the surgery is going to be without anesthesia, and this is going to hurt, so it's better for me to limp around than it is for somebody to take a scalpel to this. Like that, that's scary, understandably. I would rather limp around on a bum ankle than have somebody give me surgery without any kind of anesthesia, for sure. I think some people just picture going to therapy as like it's your therapist's goal to make you cry every time, and that's just not true either. Like I'm a crier. I'm pretty emotional, and the number of times that I've cried in therapy, I think, is honestly like twice, and one of those times was like 20 minutes after I had gotten dumped. And so it really wasn't my therapist that
Understandable.
made me cry. Yeah, it was a stupid boy, but but anyway. And not to say that, if you need a safe place to cry, like it is a safe place to cry, but that's not your therapist's goal, is to make you cry and have to feel super in touch with your feelings the whole time. I think maybe a little bit better of a medical model to kind of bring this up after, and we've kind of discussed this a little bit before, but it's almost like physical therapy, where it's teaching you different exercises to kind of help you strengthen different parts of you that either you haven't worked hard with before, or if they've got injury to them, helping re-strengthen them afterwards. And so, I think some people get lost in that medical model a little bit. I think sometimes too, people just think of it as like this bad power dynamic. Like, okay, I'm going to go to therapy. They're going to give me all this advice. They're going to tell me how to live my life. I'm not going to have autonomy over my choices anymore. Or, they just want to completely just deconstruct me. And a lot of people do not like to be told what to do. And so they're like, I'm not going to therapy. That's not what I'm looking for. But I think one of the better models for what therapy can actually look like, especially if you don't wait until you're at rock bottom and you're at the worst of the worst. If you can catch it a little bit earlier and don't wait until that point, I think it can be almost like a consultation type model, where you can even think of it as like a financial advisor, for instance. um, they kind of take an assessment of what you have, kind of try and figure out what your goals are, and help you kind of figure out how to have your best chances at accomplishing what it is you want to do, or how to spend your money or whatever. Therapist is really somebody who can kind of come alongside you and use their expertise to kind of give you ideas of how to maximize your life potential. I really feel like therapy, one of the best things that it's done for me, it's helped me to maximize my resilience. It's helped me to maximize my ability to cope well. It's helped me to maximize my ability to maximizing my ability to handle things myself and feeling more in control. And if anything, there have been certain times where I had to work to get to that point, but nothing has made me feel more in control of my life than therapy. So for people who are afraid that, oh, I'm going to go to therapy and I'm just going to completely lose control, actually, a lot of it is helping you to maximize your potential, maximize those things so that you are more in control of your life.
Yeah, I want to share something that might help put people's minds at ease when it comes to this issue. And that is one of the basically universal things that any therapist from any kind of educational background is going to do if you work with them in that kind of a relationship, is that they're going to have a care plan. And so when you come in and they put it together after the first or sometimes the second session, afterward, the therapist goes and enters their notes. And what they put down is basically, what is the goal here? Why is this person actually in therapy from the therapist's perspective? Sometimes it might be in a little bit different words than what the client would say, at least initially, but most of the time, and ideally, they would really agree that this is what the goal is. Okay. And then it's the objectives. How are we going to get there? And so I'm going to be doing this intervention and that intervention, then this other intervention, perhaps, and maybe there's 1, 2, 3, perhaps even 4. And basically, it's like, to think about, what is it that I need help with? What is it that I'm struggling with? What is it, this goal that I want to achieve? And how can I get there? It's as simple as that. That's one helpful way to look at it. And so, again, in some cases, you might walk away several weeks later thinking like, I do feel like they kind of, not that they did this, but that in therapy, I have kind of fallen apart and been put back together again, right? That might be the experience of some people. That might be what needs to happen for you to achieve your goal, but that is not the goal. That is not a universal thing by any means. So I guess all that to say that it's really a case by case basis, but that's not what we're here to do by any means.
Too, it can help people feel a little bit more at ease with that. Really, a lot of the education and training for people who are acting as therapists or counselors is to kind of it's the client takes the lead.
Yeah.
And so it's not somebody telling you what to do. It's you taking it at your own pace. You are honest with where you're at, how fast you want to go. You can take it a small step at a time. You can go faster if you're ready for that, but it's really like you're in control of your own therapy too. And so that your therapist is there to help you, not to boss you around or whatever.
Yeah, if you go to a therapy session and your therapist, starts telling you what to do, ordering you around and giving you advice, you should probably run very far and very fast, because that's not going to be an effective therapist. Yeah, any good therapist generally loves it when the client takes the lead and says, "This is what I want to do," or when the client is doing 60 to 90% of the talking in the session, that's usually a mark of a pretty good session.
Yeah.
If the therapist feels like they're teaching the whole time or trying to draw the client out the whole time, like they're pulling teeth or whatever, it's probably a little bit less effective. I would say your therapist is probably more uncomfortable than when you take the lead. That's what we're here to do. We're here to follow you in most cases. A lot of it depends on the model of therapy. There might be a little bit more directiveness, a little bit more teaching from the therapist, but it's certainly not a class. You're not going to some guru who's going to impart wisdom to you. That's not what is effective when it comes to therapy. That's not what works.
Yeah. All right.
Busted.
Okay, so that is all the myths that we have for this session. I'm planning on doing this a couple more times this season and potentially continuing this kind of throughout the years. There's just way too many myths out there, so we want to, kind of talk through all the different controversial pieces of it, or misconceptions, or honestly, even some of those gray areas. Some of these are going to be a little more nuanced. And so,
Right. Sometimes the answer might be yes, but also no.
right.
Yeah.
And so, to mention that too, we also want to hear from anybody who has
Mhm.
some myths that they want us to talk about, or even just some questions or things that they're not sure of. We want to hear about all of that. And so we'll look to include those in some of our episodes as well.
Yep. Perfect. Yeah, this would be definitely an ideal topic to be able to answer some direct questions or issues brought up by listeners.
Yep.
So send those in. Okay, well, as we wrap up here, I want to share our reflection question. And this was inspired by something that I was just kind of thinking about over the last weekend, about something that someone said to me quite a few years ago now that has always stuck with me. And it had to do with, well, it's not even something they said, it's something they did. It had to do with really being totally present with somebody and how inspiring that was to me. And I was just thinking about how, uh, well, here's what I put in a social media post. I'll just read a few sentences from it. Is that one of the most important traits that has helped make me a person I'm proud to be is when I encounter something that I want to take with me and make a part of who I am, I actually intentionally refer back to it and I say something like, something that's always stuck with me is this, or something that um, I'll always remember is when someone said this or when somebody did this. That's a very intentional thing that I do in my life. And as I wrote, um, I might have 100 things stored away that I intentionally recall. It's a sort of chest of treasures that I always carry in my mind, a priceless string of jewels that I always wear around my neck. So I find that to be a really valuable practice for me, and maybe it's something that um, that you would like to put into practice. And so I know that this episode is coming out right around the turn of the year, and so I would encourage you to do this. And it's more of a reflection than a question, but think back on 2023. And if you can identify one thing, one lesson that you learned from an encounter that you had, something that someone said to you, or something that you just like a light bulb went off and you realized, like, oh, I need to handle this in this other way, whatever it was, is that something that you could take with you for the rest of your life? And in the years to come, you can refer back to it. What is that jewel that you want to put on your necklace from 2023? I've been thinking about this question myself, and it's been really great to, you get to be an active participant in who you are becoming. You can be intentional about that. And it's like, this is the person that I want to be. I really want to be formed by this experience. Okay. So to summarize that question, what is the one thing from 2023 that you will always take with you and can refer back to for the rest of your life to shape you into the person you want to be? Yeah. Thanks.
Right. So now we've come to that horrible time of the show where I try to share our social medias and screw it up every single time and wish that Autumn was here to make me sound less old. But you can always remember, follow us on Facebook. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/emh.nsc. We are also on Instagram at embrace.mental.health. And you can always send us an email at embracementalhealthnsc@gmail.com. I think that's the
You
best
did
I've
it.
ever done. Yeah.
That was, we should actually just kind of splice out that recording of you and put it into every
Every
episode.
episode. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. This sounds suspiciously exactly like every other episode.
The
Not
only
very
way Kelsey
organic.
can do it. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, send us emails, message us on those platforms, and participate in this podcast, please.
Yeah.
We were we were joking earlier about how Kelsey and I both really kind of struggle with some of the specifics of the social media stuff, and um, to varying degrees and in different areas. But like, if I encountered someone on the sidewalk and we got to talking, and I'd be like, "Hey, I'm on this podcast. You can follow us on." Let me pull out my phone and look. So,
Yep.
yeah, not our strong points, but it's one of the many reasons why we have Autumn as part of our team too.
Yep,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
All right. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this first myth busting time. I for one enjoyed saying busted. That was a good time. But
Busted. Gotta say it in that voice.
Yes.
Busted.
Yep, we should splice that audio and use that the rest of those episodes. Specifically you.
Every time.
Yeah.
Make a loud stamp sound. Busted.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, we will see you next week, everybody, on Christmas. Merry Christmas. 1 week. Holy cow.
Thanks for listening.
Yep. Thank you for listening. Bye, everybody.
Bye.